What makes a great villain? In my opinion, a good villain is an interesting character or concept who can effectively instigate growth in the protagonist, or in Xenoblade's case, the party, driving them forward through challenges they must overcome, whilst also possessing a conceivable motive, allowing the player to understand and/or emphasize with their exploits. On an individual basis, some Moebius such as Dirk, Shania and Zed fulfill these parameters quite effectively, but when considering Moebius, the concept as a whole, I feel it falls short in some of these aspects. That's why, in this video, I will be exploring the flaws with Moebius and how I think they should have been resolved. Before we begin, however, I just need to make one thing clear. This explanation and description of Moebius is one that derives from my own interpretation of it. Additionally, the changes that I'll be outlining later in this video were based on this depiction of Moebius, so if you disagree with me or this video at any point, then please keep this in mind. I know a few of you were a little touchy when I talked about the ending in a previous video. Anyways, let's begin with us first outlining the true identity of Moebius. Put as simply as possible, Moebius is the fear of progressing to the future. You could also describe it as a fear of change, the idea that things won't turn out well or will get worse than what they currently are. This emotion/feeling is present inside of everyone, even yourself watching this video right now, but in the context of Xenoblade 3, this fear was foremost at the front of people's minds as both universes, Xenoblade 1 and 2's alike, were about to merge. This collective emotion was relayed back to Origin over and over again as it recorded data from both worlds, ultimately corrupting it and setting the events of Xenoblade 3 in motion. Actually, it's a bit more complex than that, but I already made a whole video explaining everything a while back, so watch that video first instead if you want the full rundown. From this artificial collective unconscious of emotion, however, Zed was born. It would be accurate to say that both Zed and Moebius are one and the same, in that Zed himself is the true essence of Moebius. However, it's here that we immediately start to see some of the issues begin to arise. One of these problems is the lack of exposition about Moebius throughout the majority of the game. For most players, Moebius was an unexplained concept with no inclination of being anything remotely close to the truth up until around chapter 6, where the answer finally started to become clear. But by this point, however, it was already too late. For almost the entire game, Moebius, the main antagonists, have been a complete enigma to us, preventing the player from becoming emotionally invested with their story and motives. This is then further hindered via the sheer quantity of Moebius that the game throws at you. In total, there are 25 different Moebius enemies, 15 of which die on the first encounter. On the other hand, K, O and P dying immediately is understandable, as their deaths are used as a way to introduce the party to new concepts, as well as to progress the story forwards. But the remaining 12 Moebius, nearly half of the total, do little to leave a lasting impression. Heck, let's play a little game quickly to prove my point. Which consoles are in charge of Colony 0, Colony 30, Colony Iota, Colony Gamma, and Colony Mu? I'll give you 5 seconds. Pretty hard to remember each colony's console, isn't it? And it gets harder when you try to recall what they even did. Admittedly, both of the previous points, depending on your perspective, can actually be viewed as positives, with the lack of Moebius info immersing you further into the party's position, and Moebius galore making a point on how many Moebius there actually are. But in reality, the end result, in my opinion, is less than favourable. This leads me onto my final problem with Moebius, which is the biggest one of them all: how this all impacts Zed. Because Zed is the literal embodiment of Moebius itself, these problems from before end up reflecting on him as well, leading to a lack of understanding about Moebius. This is primarily done through a lack of build-up to Zed, with most individual Moebius being unmemorable on top of the absence of any information surrounding them, both points I brought up before. Ultimately, this prevents Zed from ever becoming an imposing obstacle for the party to overcome, as the game fails to develop and explore the truths, reasons, and motives of Moebius as a whole. So how do we fix all of this? Well, one thing that I need to make clear is that I won't be touching Zed as a character in the slightest. Recall before how I mentioned that Zed was one of the good Moebius villains. As a character, and I emphasize character, Zed is very successful in his role as an antagonist, with his only shortfall being his development and build-up, creating, at first glance, a lackluster final boss. This, however, is only the fault of Moebius, not Zed, as I believe that the other Moebius enemies should have been used more so as a narrative device to foreshadow the true identity of Moebius and fundamentally improve the concept of Zed. Therefore, that's exactly what I'm going to do. The first major change will be a reduction in the overall quantity of named Moebius, bringing the total down to 17, nearly a third removed, being entirely composed of the Moebius who appear in the first amphitheater scene. All in all, aside from the story-required Moebius like X and Y, Ed and M, and Chris and Yoren, there are only 5 Moebius restricted to side content. On top of that, only one of these Moebius will be killed on their first encounter, aiming to prevent the Moebius entity from getting stale, whilst also granting each one some time to develop as a character in their own right. For that reason, we will need to reuse different Moebius for hero and ascension quests, so that there is still a boss to fight, retaining at least some of the original structure of Xenoblade 3, while still clearly pinpointing the themes about Moebius. Furthermore, this would require each named console to now manage 2 colonies instead of 1, both a Kavesi and Agnian one. Granted, if Monolith are setting up / foreshadowing the DLC story, or future Xenoblade entries with Console A, thus completing the alphabet, then this strategy admittedly doesn't work. However, counter-argument, it was shown on multiple occasions through Xenoblade 3 that there are far more than just 26 Moebius, so I personally believe this sacrifice is more than worth it. In addition, to fill in the gaps left via the Moebius we removed, we could utilize unnamed generic Moebius enemies, as at the end of the day, we still need enemies to fight when liberating colonies and the like. I already mentioned how there are hundreds of Moebius present in this scene, so let's use them. So in some circumstances where we'd have fought a morbed console member before, we instead might fight 3 or 4 random consoles, hopefully mixing up the engagements at least a little bit. But now that there are fewer Moebius to deal with, we can start to look at how to improve the foreshadowing of Moebius's true meaning. One aspect that makes Zed such an intimidating and interesting antagonist is how he's virtually emotionless, due to him once more being the physical embodiment of Moebius. And it's for this reason that I believe the key to one becoming a Moebius should be emotion. The exact parameters are still unclear in Xenoblade 3, but what if, for one soul to arrive in the amphitheater, they themselves had to die embodying an emotion? In this sense, Zed is preying on the fear of one's passion being lost through death, instead obtaining their passion for himself after they become Moebius, symbolizing that to become a Moebius is to give in to fear, resulting in those that do becoming Zed both metaphorically and literally. In conjunction, each Moebius entity would get far more development in-game, allowing them to show and represent their referenced emotion to the player, especially now there are fewer Moebius to belie this characteristic. That said, some Moebius already seem to use this stratagem in Xenoblade 3. Take Triton for example. Other than being a man of the sea, his main character trait is how free-spirited he is, firstly escaping the restrictions of the mortal body by becoming Moebius, before eventually breaking free of his responsibilities from even that, with the help of Ouroboros, and consequently, he would represent freedom. There's even more examples as well, with Shania referencing envy, Dirk embodying bloodlust, NM representing regret, and Irma from Colony Mu personifying companionship. In actuality, it's likely that this was the original idea / concept for Moebius in the first place, as all of of the widely agreed best Moebius seem to incorporate some level of emotion into their character already. Essentially, from now on, each Moebius you encounter would be overflowing with emotive expressions specific to themselves, allowing each to become their own dynamic character with their own particular quirks and characteristics, compared to simply feeling robotic and repetitive like before. In tandem, each and every Moebius you encounter on your journey would be building up and foreshadowing the truth about Moebius, whilst also simultaneously being a contradiction to it. Hopefully, this would lead to players arriving at their own conclusions about the identity of Moebius, before ultimately being proven wrong by Zed, the complete opposite of Moebius thus far. In reality, however, the game and Moebius had been foreshadowing the truth about Zed since your first encounter, creating an astonishing experience as you look back over your adventure with the wool now pulled from your eyes. Those were the major changes that I needed to discuss, but there is still one more problem that I think needs to be resolved. The true Moebius. I think it's fair to say that considering their position in Xenoblade 3, X and Y are some of the most underutilized characters in the game. Both show up kind of randomly in side stories and pose little threat to us considering their status as true Moebius. They were for sure some of the most anticlimactic bosses fought in the series thus far, and are widely considered to be some of the worst Moebius. Apart from those who simp for X, of course. Fortunately, however, there is a simple solution. Just make every party member's side story a story required event. In addition, we'll also be making either X or Y present in each one of them, forcing us to encounter the Moebius duo far earlier than before. X is already present in both Uni and Senna's side story, so if we add her into Noah's also, primarily just as a cameo role, then we'll be golden, and her sadistic personality can shine through. That leaves Y now being present in both Lan's and Tyon's side story, which to be honest, he should have been in the first place. Y fits the crazy scientist persona really well, which fits great with both excursions, due to both being great opportunities for him to collect test data. A perspective change also, where Y only looks upon the people of Ionios as mere test subjects, could have really added a lot to his character, if making him a little generic, but I still think this would have been an improvement over an L with a chunky form. With these changes in place, the true Moebius would have the breathing room they require to grow and develop as characters, rather than being chucked into the end of the story like an afterthought, allowing the player to truly grasp their morals and authority throughout Ionios as one of the largest hurdles to overcome. Overall, I believe these changes would resolve practically every issue with Moebius, whilst also substantially enhancing the overall experience of the game. Xenoblade 3 was focused more so on its thematic messages than its lore this time around, and whilst I don't wish to contradict this decision, I do think that the above changes could enhance the storytelling through the added context, whilst maintaining this direction. A clearer picture about Moebius could have complemented the narrative, hopefully leading to there being less confusion about Moebius in all. A clever hint from Monica in the city could have been used to clarify any doubts the player might have had, while still keeping the true identity of Moebius vague enough for us to speculate about. In addition, the other Moebius characters being more fleshed out would only help with solidifying the themes of the game, and simultaneously enhancing their character far more than before, such as with Kay potentially being Kenny Rohan from Colony 9, a theory that has been circulating around my Discord recently. All in all, Moebius as a concept worked brilliantly in game, but it was sadly let down by some of the characterization, confusing and clouding the themes and ideals of the concept. Even so, whilst most may see Moebius as a disappointment, I hope that this video proves that the solution to fix these issues is far from complicated, giving us hope for the future that the DLC story will correct them itself, rather than staying focused on the current judgment of Moebius. With that, all of the solutions solutions I believe should have been in place are discussed. If you're interested in hearing about exactly what each Moebius would represent and where they would appear in the story, then check the pinned comment on this video below, where I'll detail all of the relevant information. That said, I hope you have enjoyed this video, as well as enlightening you to the positives and negatives of Moebius. Feel free to leave your own opinion in the comments below and how you'd attempt to resolve the issues I discussed. With that said, I appreciate you all for watching this video and clicking that subscribe button. 4,000 subs is just a hop, skip and a jump away from us. Still, I'll catch you all in the next one. This is JB, signing off.